Good day, everyone who decided to join my channel. This is Divine Destiny of Souls, and this is the episode 8 in the series of first podcasts. I'm trying to tell the story of my shamanic awakening, and today I will continue to share my story, what happened after the January of 2021. So being in a conversation with the Queen Mother Spirit of Sechelt was quite an intimidating and unusual experience. I didn't know anything of that sort ever existed and how it's all working out. I was just trying to connect to Paul's spiritual guides and all that I wanted. But I was presented with this unique opportunity basically to meet the spirits who empower, protect, and govern the lands of British Columbia and specifically Vancouver. This is their territory and this is how they sort of exist. And before this I never knew about the hierarchy of souls as well, but apparently what happens is that, and hierarchy of spirits for that matter, right? But the idea is that any sort of plant, land, or water have their own spirits, but they're also kind of like a royal spirits who sort of govern all the others. And we're using sort of the word royal and queen in this form is that just to express the extent to which these spirits sort of exist, because they're not just the spirits of the Sechelt lands and waters. They're not only sort of in charge of those lands, they are in charge of most of Vancouver and sort of British Columbia. So that's why to kind of describe them, it's just easier to use these terms. And at the same time, the energy that was coming from Ariadne, that was coming from the spirit, was of that kind of presence, of that status. There was this element of kind of reverence and humility, and that I was like invited into some place where I wouldn't be ever be able to visit without Polly. And it was also sort of presented to me in this way, is that without Polly I would never be able to sort of have an audience with such a powerful spirits. And it was also sort of related to me that since sort of since they are the royal spirits, whoever they empower, whoever sort of in their care, in their responsibility, the souls that are in their responsibility, they do also have the same status of royalty on these lands, and they're of course more empowered and more protected, but therefore they also kind of responsible for more people. This is the sort of obligation of princesses and princes, and kind of course Polly as a soul has her own domain in the skies, and she's been like sort of traveling throughout the lives. But in this life she specifically was placed to be connected to the spirits of Sechelt, so therefore she was kind of like she had the status of the spiritual princess of these lands. And she was also one of the most favorite daughters of Ariadne, so she was also kind of like, her mother was very strict about everything that we discussed. And initially it was really confusing because she couldn't believe that Polly could find her empowerment. She couldn't believe that she chose her man based on love, not because of like superficial sort of girlish things. Ariadne questioned my integrity. So like when we kind of met, we settled in this like a parlor room next to the fireplace. She was there, I was there, but there was also this another spirit. He was kind of like, it was masculine spirit, and he was sort of her left hand, I would say, like he was sort of in charge of her entourage and of her daily obligations, and just like being conduit between whoever wanted to talk to Queen. and he was there just to sort of record the arrangements that we would made in this conversation. And so at first Queen didn't want to really like talk to me, and she didn't really want to sort of find a space for me. She perceived me as sort of like a not not of the same status, you know, like not being able to assist her daughter, not to be able to provide for her. All these quite evident reservations. But as more and more I was trying to sort of make my argument, is that I'm not expecting any kind of like extra preferences, but this is where we are, and I just love this woman, and I can't do anything about it, you know. And this is like that the expression of my love is the ability to be able to heal her, but also heal through this process. And I just also wanted to understand what was going on between us and why we were sort of placed in this like a strange predicament. Of course, Polly was empowered and protected and guarded by the spirits of Sechelt only in this life. They were in her care only for this period of time, but I knew her from past lives, and of course I had this information that could potentially assist her with the healing. And I also, Queen was also aware about the curse, and that only I could remove that. And so when I sort of presented to the Queen the stories of what I was able to heal over these past 2 months with the evidence, with the concrete evidence, she was completely surprised and shocked. She couldn't believe that because she only seen Polly as stubborn, as sort of and rebellious. And she checked and verified all of my claims, and she kind of like accepted that this is the case, that I was guided to be able to heal her. And she also knew that the curse could only be removed with the love with the unconditional love, right? Like by the man with unconditional love. And so, but just being of the royal status and just being that level of kind of engagement, and I was not of the royal status, and I was also sort of an immigrant on these lands, and that was one of the concerns that Queen expressed, is that she's kind of like, well, you're saying that you want to heal Polly, and then she would return to Jessica, and then you want to be with Jessica, but you kind of like, if you're not Canadian citizen, it doesn't really matter if you'll have money or not. Like you kind of like, you have to be that here to be able to sort of marry her, if that's the case. So like there were many different rules and conditions that were presented to me that I need to fulfill. And then she started to ask me why after I spent basically already 7 years in Canada, by that time I was nowhere near close to get permanent residency. And I kind of like explained to her all of my predicaments, and I explained to her my financial situation and showed her my work. And she was completely surprised that like sort of the man with my talents can't make a living here and have to constantly struggle. But she was also surprised that I couldn't obtain permanent residency. And she kind of like talked to Bartholomew, and they made this conclusion of like, to sort of, because they heard these stories over and over again, and it was a real concern for them. They kind of like, there's something going on in the capital of this country that's just kind of like being malevolent towards the people that we're inviting here to be stewards of these lands. And basically sort of we spent entire evening, we spent around like from 8 p.m. to probably like 1 a.m. just like talking. We had dinner, and they specifically told me to get dinner at the Earl's restaurant, which they claim to be the chain that they kind of empower and operate from the spiritual realm. And they specifically said that to get the food from that place. And sort of we had dinner, and then we kind of continued our negotiations. And so it was determined towards the closer to midnight, it was determined that we would go on the path of the spiritual contract, that we would draw a specific contract that with the specific conditions and obligations, where I sort of like take responsibility for Polly, and that would allow her to live with me, and but also because I would use this contract, Sechelt spirits will help me to get permanent residency and then eventually citizenship, because that was something that was very important for them, to kind of like make me like official resident and steward of their lands, and was one of the main preconditions. And so we kind of like settled the main terms over this period of time, and then over the night, basically from 1 a.m. to like 9 a.m. I wasn't allowed to sleep, and I was sort of there was a legal team. The sort of Queen went to sleep, and the Bartholomew with legal team stayed over through the night to like sort of draft this contract and to make every single like discuss every single item and discuss every single obligation that we're taking upon each other. And I was clarifying my story. I was also had to explain everything about my path, show them where I came from, introduce my spirits, kind of like explain my shamanic endeavors, explain what my talents are, what my kind of like what my main creative endeavors right now, what I work on, all these things. And then we kind of like went through the entire contract point by point, and basically just made sure that everything is sort of aligned for the both parties, and that we're assuming the obligations kind of like in a good conscience and just like in a clear mind sort of thing. And then towards the morning, we were allowed to have breakfast with Polly, and kind of she was completely happy that I kind of presented my case to her mom, and mom didn't like push us away, but she actually decided to help us, and that like we are doing this contract, and she was like incredibly super excited of this whole thing. And sort of in the morning, Queen came over to sort of to read main conditions, and I was also obliged to make a vow that I recorded on my iPhone in the presence of Polly, in the presence of Ariadne, and the entire entourage of spirits. And basically, when I started to tell that vow, I started to cry, and just couldn't stop, and was basically saying that I'll do anything to express my love. I want to protect this woman. I want to empower her. I want to save her. I hope she will like have a fulfilling life, and I hope she will have a children, and that I don't see any other path for me but only this path. And that because it was also kind of like determined, I was kind of like angry with Ariadne, because I was saying that how could you allow Jessica to get to that state? How you could allow her to sort of lose her soul, to lose her energy body, to be in such a deprived state? But Ariadne said that this is Damian, and we had no control over Damian, and we didn't know how to fight him. So that's why we couldn't do anything up until this point. And then when Polly ran away, it was also kind of like confusing what they could do, because they didn't know that Polly needed to find me to be able to heal. And so it was determined in the contract equally that sort of the main goal would be for Polly to return into Jessica's body, and then guide Jessica to meet me, and then we would have a potential to have a family. And at the same time, it was agreed upon that this would be sort of our karma that we've been dragging on throughout the centuries, but maybe this is not the karma that we should live for. And Ariadne was also kind of aware that if Damian has already sort of in the process of possessing Jessica, that he could also sort of hurt Polly, and that she would never be able to sort of do that, and he could also sort of kill Jessica, right? Like, so it was all kind of evident and clear that this was unraveling. It wasn't only that she could die like in the next couple of months, it was also that like Damian would continue to try to take her life, because he was confused spirit, he didn't know what he was doing, and he didn't know how to sort of properly process that, and that's why Polly kept dying in previous lives. So even though the goal was this kind of like a inspiring romantic story, right, like that kind of we would sort of be together if I'll write that book, and Ariadne was also specifically said that that the contract is for 4 years, and over these 4 years we will need to write 2 books about our story, one sort of in a feminine voice, one in a masculine voice, that would complement us. One would be sort of our masculine child, one would be sort of our girl child, and that one would sort of heal the life of Camilla and Eloise, and the other one would heal the life of Thomas and Polly. And specifically these lives and these connections had to be healed for us to be empowered. And the 3-year mark for the first book, it was determined in the same contract, is that Ariadne specifically said that the first book has to be published in 3 years. And it was published by the date that was sort of set, exactly like just a couple of weeks after that 3-year mark. And that Ariadne said that this is the way to sort of save Jessica and to keep her alive. If that, like, we would invest our time in writing this novel and publishing it, and by publishing it we would lock Damian and close him off and allow Jessica to live. But even though that was sort of the highest aspiration, Ariadne was also aware not only that Damian could potentially kill Jessica over this period of time, but that also that Polly chooses to die quite young in every single life for the spiritual reasons. And so even though Polly was like determined, she was like, no, we're gonna end up together, we're gonna be together, we'll have a family. Ariadne was kind of like also quite logical and reasonable. She was like, if by the end of your healing Polly would choose death, then you will also have to sort of open yourself up to the possibilities of another love and sort of be open to other women, because we want your happiness, and if it would not be with Polly, we still want your happiness, because we want you on these lands and we want you to empower people on these lands and heal them equally as you will try to heal Polly. Even though I kind of never wanted to hear that part of Ariadne's speech, and I was sort of determined that we just have such a big love with Polly that there is no way that we're not going to end up together. Of course, Ariadne already kind of felt my story and kind of saw a little bit into the future, and she was aware about my twin flame, the third woman that I would meet on my path, and that she wanted me to be happy with that woman if Polly would choose death. And this is what basically she told me on that meeting, even though I tried to deny that, and I was trying to sort of like say that I'm not interested in any other woman, because I was also kind of, I'm with Polly's mother, spiritual mother, and I'm kind of like I'm committed to her. I'm like just expressed my commitment to heal and empower her. I expressed my commitment to live with her and to write these books together. So of course, for me it was kind of, how can I accept this other guidance, in the presence of mother when I'm trying to make this good impression. But of course, Ariadne was just thinking of us, of our best possible story, and she just knew more than we kind of like could know at that moment. And it was also kind of one of the obligations of the contract was that Polly would be spiritually chained to me for the duration of the contract, so she would not run away from her obligations, and she would finish the book and she would finish the healing. Ariadne just knew Polly too well, and it was just her story that's why Polly died in the previous lives in tragic ways, because she kept running away from the teachings that I was giving to her. And that's why we accumulated all this bad karma, and that's why we were supposed to write these books, because Polly kept neglecting writing them. She was supposed to write a book as Polly Jefferson, then she was supposed to write a book as Eloise, but she never did. And so right now, sort of, to be able to finish that karma, she had to be sort of chained to me, so we would like write these books together and sort of release our karma in this way and be able to expel Damian. And so it was because of these things, I also made a vow of like not being involved with any women or try to date any women or try to pursue any women, and that I would even not be allowed to spend the time in the presence of a woman unless Polly provides her enthusiastic consent and she sees that there is a value for both of us in this interaction. And of course, at that time, I didn't have any clients, and it was only experimentations and just trying to navigate this reality and trying to sort of heal myself as well. But yeah, it was this case of like I couldn't even go to a healer or a therapist unless Polly would meet her soul first and determine that she can provide consent and there is empowerment for all of us if we will continue on this path. So these were sort of kind of like limitations that we agreed upon and that I assumed. And of course, at that time, I was like enthusiastically gave that consent because I was like so traumatized by the experience with Jessica that I was like, I'm gonna stay away from women as far as possible, and especially like from sex or any kind of intimacy. I couldn't like even see myself going there. So for me, it was at that moment of time, it was kind of like easy to give that, even though I'm kind of like, 4 years sounds just too much for that. That I kind of asked Ariadne if that vow would start to be sort of detrimental to my psyche or to my physical health, then we will have to like renegotiate it or something like that. That's how I presented it to her, and she like obviously agreed. She kind of like understood the human nature, and it's just like the part of my design as well that I couldn't avoid, even though it was sort of natural for me in the beginning. And yeah, so all these things were like happening at once, and then sort of because I cried through this process, and I cried because basically I just wanted the best for Jessica, like I just wanted her not to have all these like past life traumas, karmas chasing her. I wanted to remove that grief that Polly was carrying, and that grief was shared with me. I wanted to remove all these like anxieties and explained tormenting emotions, basically all this burden of tragic deaths and rape and abuse that Polly experienced in past lives, but right now they were sort of clouding Jessica's reality. And yeah, I just wanted this woman to be empowered in her essence. I wanted her to be able to, to not do this work so she would hurt herself or others. This is like where my righteous indignation comes from right now, is that I can't explain how this horrible treatment of young women is considered to be normal in this society, and how this society claims to be like most developed and healthy and civilized society when they treat young women in this way, when they sort of like not allow them to heal. Like there were literally not a single person around Jessica, not her peers, not her clients, not her like relatives, not her management, who could sort of tell her or see that she was in trouble, that just tell her to heal yourself first until you before you will continue on this path. It's nothing out of ordinary. And if there would be like any communities, or if there was a society in here, it would not have been so, but this is what the society wants. It wants that providers to be traumatized. That's why they have criminalization of sex work, because they want these women to be broken, they want these women to be damaged, so they would damage men in return. And like God knows how many men she damaged on her path already, how many men committed suicide because of her, how many men, you know, like had fears of intimacy because of her, all these things. And there, it should not be like that. There is no reason whatsoever for things to be like that, and to claim that, oh, if we're gonna ban sex work, then like all men would suddenly just, you know, their natural desires and their natural design would suddenly just change because they ban sex work, or the natural design of the women who were born as whores, who were born to be sex workers, who were born to live by their desires and to follow their desires in the most empowering way, and to be these magicians of spirituality and sexuality, to be the priestesses of love or of divinity, to provide the service for nature. To claim that you would change their nature by just forcing, by sort of criminalizing their work, it's never going to happen. And it's like new women would be born like that, and new women would be traumatized, and new clients would be traumatized. But of course, again, if we would look at the nature of Canadian society, it does have this malevolent intent to destroy the purposes of people's souls, to remove them from their most empowering paths, to traumatize them and make them broken, so they would just be like stupid consumers who like mindlessly following the obedience of the big brother and buying whatever TV is telling them to buy, basically. And to achieve that, you just fracture the personality of woman. She becomes this disempowered, she starts to traumatize men in return, and so this is what you have. And I'm kind of like, I'm sorry, but I would never accept these norms as something good and virtuous, no matter how Canadians claim it that to be. And I definitely never gonna accept that everything that Canadians do is good and virtuous and right only because they're Canadians. It's just the most ridiculous and foolish argument that I ever heard. And just to claim that Canada reached some kind of like a utopia state, and that everything is as best as it possibly can be, and that there could be no improvements, and especially the improvements cannot be offered by immigrants. Again, I can't like accept all of that as true, because it's not only ridiculous, it damages people, it leads them to the destruction. It's like Jessica doesn't had to be in that space where I met her. You know, she didn't need to be on the path to death only because she was living in Canada. It's just such a horrible way to treat women, to make them, to force them to believe that they're objects, that they kind of like there's nothing in them, that their bodies are broken, that they're like, you know, just here for like almost like a furniture in the background, that they're like property that can be traded. Like I can't accept any of these truths that being promoted heavily by this ideology of feminism, which is like the main religion of Canada right now. And it's just like I can't really accept any of that, and I would never accept any of that, and I can't understand how like women in their 40s, 50s, 60s can do something like that to younger women, because she was not made like that by men. She was made like that by women, and by her teachers, by her peers, by the role examples that she sees in society. And I'm sorry, but I would never accept something so nefarious as that, because basically the ideologues of feminism, they are all women who are like in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and they are creating the conditions where a young woman would be in such a broken state as Jessica was. And there is a definite malicious intent and nefarious intent, because they're proposing all these sick notions about femininity, about masculinity, about the empowerment of sex. They removing spirituality from sexuality. They are convinced that people don't have souls. They're convinced that people don't have energy bodies. They don't understand that sex is not merely a physical pleasure, but it's like more than that. There is like a element of soul connection. There is element of energy body connection. There is element of empowering aura. But all the women that I saw who do sex education here, they claim to be this like a, they even have like their universities and their schools, and all they do is that they basically creating new Jessicas. And again, not men made Jessica the way that she is. It's women who made her this way. And it's women who continuously promote this limited perception of sex, that continuously promote the removal of spirituality from sex, that continuously promote that sex is just a fun thing to do, like that there is nothing else but just like physical pleasures. Like this is what these women want the new generation to be. This is what they want for the future of their country. It's just like so out there and so malevolent and so horrible. And I mean, again, if you have a purpose to destroy the country, if you have a purpose to destroy the nation, if you have the purpose to fight the war between sexes, this is exactly what you would do. But again, I would always call out such women. And again, I don't have issue with Jessica because she never claimed anything to be something different. She always claimed that I'm just companion. She never claimed to be like sex educator. She never claimed to be intimacy coach. So whatever, whatever abuses I endured, even though they were painful and hard to process and hard to get over, she did all of that because she was like a small naive girl who just didn't know better, right? So, and she never claimed any kind of like different thing, but other than just being luxury companion. And even though it took her time to get there, and like she could only get there once we healed the trauma of her soul, I'm more shocked by older women who have their practices of intimacy coaching, of counseling, of sex education, of women who like have the schools and the universities of sex education, and who create the conditions where young women would turn into Jessica. And I just can't accept that, and I would never accept that, and I would call these women out because this is the world that they want to create, and this is not the world where women can be empowered. This is not the world where men can be empowered. This is not the world where sexuality can be reached its highest potential, and it's definitely not the world of civilized country, especially like progressive country. No, this is like a very barbaric and primitive nation, and everything that's malevolent in the sex work and sex education is coming from these women who created these kinds of conditions and who continuously promote the notions of created by the ideology of feminism, that women have broken bodies, that they're basically flawed by design, that they are inferior to men, that they should be just biological robots, that the only way that women could be empowered is that if she would be drugged and do the work from masculine energies. I would never accept any of these conditions, but this is the main ideology that's sort of the main religion that's like being right now spread all over Canada, and this is like sort of assumed, that religion even assumed by the government as the main religion of this country. And we kind of understand that the nature of feminism is that like it was first, it has the same sort of the ideology of feminism has the same view of women and female sexuality as Christian church had. So we can see this like a general progression of how Christian church and all of its ideology of enslavement and seeing people as sort of not more than kind of property, it was translated into the system of communism, and that system kind of like continued the ideas to spread the ideas of Christian church and to create the worldwide slavery system. And the feminism was just derived from communism. It was actually invented by Soviets in the beginning of the century to sort of like feel the working force, because many men died during the First World War, and especially during the Second World War. It was just only women who were like working on factories and doing all these works. So feminism was created for that purpose, is to sort of like to strip women from their femininity and to shame their sexual pleasures, because female sexual pleasures is the only thing that brings empowerment to man, and the only thing that allows man to reach the higher planes of consciousness and to reach kind of like a plane of femininity as well, and to kind of like gain insights, gain spiritual clairvoyancy, gain different talents and inspiration for their work, and even like claim their most empowering work as well. They can only discover it in the higher planes of consciousness, and they can only reach that through female sexual pleasures. There is no other route for man to get there, right? And so if you sort of shame a woman for her essence, for her femininity, she wouldn't be transmitting grace and femininity into the world. That's one thing. But if you also sort of like punish her for her sexual pleasure, make them shameful and infuse her with guilt and infuse her with all these like limited notions, then of course she would never be able to empower men, and of course so then men would be spiritually castrated, and then they would be easier to manipulate. And so this is what older women in this society want. They want men to just be obedient slaves, and the only way to achieve that is to sort of like spread the ideology of feminism and to destroy young women from early age as much as possible. You know, like if you sort of bombard them with contradictory ideas, TV and music industry all promotes promiscuity, all promotes free sex, all promotes kind of like no strings attached engagement, no commitments, no obligations, no relationship. But at the same time, you have the religious fanatism of Christian church that promotes kind of like a shameful perception of sex. And like it's just appalling to see that sex is much more shamed and judged in Canada than it was, for example, in Russia, where like literally there was no sex during Soviet times, you know. But people are more empowered, they have more sexual education, they understand sex, they understand intimacy, they understand how to engage. Men understand how to engage with women, women understand how to engage with men. It all comes naturally. Whether here it's kind of like you see naked women on every bus stop, in every commercial, in every movie, but at the same time women are so ashamed of their sexuality that you can't even approach them, or you can't even like discover them or like do the empowering practice, because they are just terrified of anything, even like the touch itself, even like essential sensory therapy practices or any kind of like a touch practices. They are just like completely in fear, and you can't even like, you don't even offer penetrative sex, right? Like you just offering some explorations, and they still fearful and afraid of. And so to this day, like traumatized Jessica, all these images and all these events that happened empower me on my path and empower me to discover the most healthy and fulfilling sexual healing practices, and to discover the sexual healing arts in its highest design, in its highest form, why it was created, why women are born as sex workers, why they're designed like that, why they have supernatural talents to be able to do this work. Because you can't do this work if you don't have like specific spiritual, physical, and psychological talents, emotional capacity, all these things, and clairvoyancy. all the talents that other women often don't have. Because being a sex worker is a spiritual path. It's not the path that most women can understand or recognize, because they live regular lives and they don't live the spiritual path. But when you do follow a spiritual path, you're usually all alone, but then there's like a higher level of empowerment beyond that. And it was all sort of like not only empowered by my own trauma, by seeing Jessica traumatized, but also that Polly wanted to discover what would be the highest potential of sexual healing arts, what would be the most empowering way to do sex work, that it would be both fulfilling for clients and the providers, how it should be sort of designed, what were the temples of sexual healing arts in the past, and why don't have them. And we, of course, again, don't have them because of the same ideologues of communism and Christianity and feminism that don't believe in empowering way of sexuality and would like fight as hell against the temples of sexual healing arts. But this is the sort of the most empowering future that I keep seeing, and one of the things that we were discussing with Ariadne equally is that this is what we want for on these lands, that's what the spirits want on these lands. They don't want future generations of women to be in such a distressed state. They don't want the abuses to happen. They don't want sex workers to lose their souls. And of course, they don't want clients of sex workers to commit suicide or also lose their souls, right? And they don't want the clients of sex workers then be traumatized about sex. And to be able to get there, we kind of like, it was the first step to commit to this contract. But quite soon enough, it became clear that the books are one thing, but then that we would sort of discover more about the spiritual design of sex work. And this is what I write about right now, why nature created sex workers, how it all works, and how this work supposed to be done and in empowering ways, and where is the growth for both provider and the clients in this arrangement, and basically to discover how it was in the past and to bring that knowledge to the surface in this reality. And it was all kind of empowered by Polly, to be honest. She kept having these dreams of a temple of sexual healing arts. She kept having these visions of how it could be done. Once we sort of returned from our trip, she started to look for different books on sexual healing arts and empowering practices, of tantric practices, of sexual alchemy practices, of energy exchange, of shamanic healing, of energy healing, all these things that were part of temples of sexual healing arts in the past, and especially in ancient Egypt. And yeah, it was this huge aspiration of Polly. She was like, again, this sexual healing artist embodied in the soul, right? Like it was her natural design. She knew about sex work more than other souls of sex workers that I've interacted with. She was just in tune with that essence, with that energy, with that birthright of a whore who's just getting empowered through her sexual pleasures, and that she provides healing through her sexual pleasures. And we started to see like different images and different kind of like practices that could possibly be developed in the physical life. Of course, all of our connection with Polly was happening in the spiritual realm, right? Like, but I could sort of tap into what my soul and Polly was doing together in intimate way, the way that they sort of engaged in the exchange of sexual energies. And that inspired me to kind of like develop my own practices and my own kind of like ideas for what can be potentially used for my empowering engagement in the future with Jessica. That's how I believed, or with any woman that sort of Ariadne believed that I should be happy with. But also like kind of find the practices that would I can sort of share with clients as well, and just bring deeper level of intimacy and connection between the couples. And so we kind of like returned from that trip um, with many different emotions, to be honest. Like it was the most unusual, challenging channeling situation that I've been in. It was the most unusual process, like because like again I spent the entire night not sleeping, and so had to restore myself, but it was worth it. And just this having this kind of like a hope and commitment, and having something on these lands to work towards, because like I was spent 7 years living here, was basically just like getting by, floating along, not like seeing any kind of like future and prospects. And right now there was something tangible that I could reach for, and was such an incredible feeling for a man as well to kind of to pursue the dream of my woman. I was always like that. I find that there is a highest empowerment for men when they commit to their women in this way. I don't think that a man can discover themselves in any other way. I don't think that man can achieve anything or arrive to his highest purpose and destiny without the guidance of his woman. And here I have Polly, who had not only this incredible intuition, but had this like a spiritual protectors, and she was like right inside of me, so I could tap into her perspectives and tap into her essence just on the instant. She was just there all the time with me, and that she has this powerful vision of us being together in the future. And so I was just following that vision. She had this vision of these 2 books that she wanted to write, and so I just committed to these books because I just wanted to see her dreams come true. And I knew that if I would follow her dreams, I would also arrive in my empowerment, and that I would learn shamanism. And she was also kind of, even though again everybody's kind of acknowledges how Polly is difficult, how she's rebellious, and how stubborn she was so open to become my apprentice of shamanism. It's like I was sort of, the queen told me specifically that they would help me to understand my shamanic powers and to get the highest understanding of my design and to unravel in my essence, and that they will give me different missions to fulfill, and they would provide me with different teachers who would guide me to my empowerment, and that they will like sort of that the Queen and Bartholomew would supervise my education into shamanism. But it was also sort of agreed upon that Polly would have to be my apprentice as well, and she would need to do all these sessions and ceremonies and education together with me. And even though nobody believed that she would agree, she was incredibly enthusiastic and excited to actually start this journey. She really wanted to become a shaman, even though she didn't believe that she is the one. And she kind of like always thought small of herself. But once we kind of like started to do our missions, it became kind of like evident that there is a huge empowerment for her as well. And soon we kind of like became teachers to one another. She would like find something that I kind of like couldn't see. She would have her intuition to create practices to guide me through the lens. And so it became this like a teamwork where we kind of created together and worked together and studied together every single day. So we continued to live like that with Polly, and there was like some days where we did the energy healing work for Jessica when Polly would ask me to do that. It was almost like every other day, I would say, but it was kind of like depending on what Polly would suggest. And the way that I said it, like when I saw Jessica for the first time, I was only thinking about how I could heal her energy body from all the holes and all the problems that she had. And I kind of like, I did this work on Veronica, and I knew that I had these talents, and then right now I offer it as a service in my spiritual practice. But at that time I didn't know that this work can also be performed on a distance. And of course it could only be performed during the night when Polly would bring the energy body of Jessica into my space, when sort of like she had this chance, right? Like, so, and this is how it was happening. And so slowly we kind of like continued doing this work. And one of the things that Jessica told me during the dates was that she didn't like her apartment that she was living in, and she wanted to live in a new one. And in my perception, that was kind of like one of the confirmations of our work, is that when Jessica moved out of her apartment somewhere around the end of March of 2021, that was the signal that our energy work that we did and the soul work that we did by that point kind of like empowered her decision to move. First it was that her switch to the independent practice, and now she had the place that she wanted to live in. And even though kind of she had independent practice, I could sense that she was struggling, and I was sensing that she still couldn't have like enough clients to sustain herself, and it was kind of like demanding. And it took about, I think it took about a year for her to get on her feet and to arrive to the place that she wanted to arrive. And then from then on, she kind of like started her descent, because by like in 2 years' time, we healed all of the past lives, and we healed her energy body, and in around like this, and then we sealed Damian as well. And so in around 2.5 years from the moment when we started with engagement, Jessica found herself in a place in the industry that she wanted to find herself in, and she continues to be this high-end escort, a luxury companion, who's like one of the most expensive escorts in the town, in the city of Vancouver. And to get there, she couldn't be able to get there unless we would sort of heal the traumas of her soul and heal the traumas of past lives. So it was sort of no other way for her to become who she wanted to become without the spiritual work that I did. So that was one element of our work. And then the other one was that it was also agreed that since Damian kind of like has already so much power over Jessica and over Polly, that he would not let Polly go so easily. So I could kind of like allow him to be in Jessica's body, because I still couldn't understand how it all works, but I couldn't allow him to have Polly. And so by the rules that were set together with Ariadne as well, and by her entourage, is that I was allowed to spend time with Polly until the end of March, and then she would have to go into dungeon of Damian, because he had a chance to sort of like take control over her by the rules of this curse that he placed upon Polly 500 years ago. But if I would sort of show up with my unconditional love, I would be able to sort of destroy these demons and take Polly back to the surface. And if I would be able to do that, she would be completely detached from Jessica, and Damian would take full control of Jessica, but I would also have the entirety of Polly with me. And so that would allow me to sort of like heal her in the most empowering ways, because there would be no pieces of Polly that she hides from me, like so. And by that time, I was still undetermined, and I still didn't know everything that I needed to know to heal Polly. And she was also kind of trying to make a good impression, so she was hiding parts about her story from me, because she was embarrassed by them and she was ashamed by them, because she kind of like betrayed me in the past many times, and she didn't want to go there, and she kind of like just was this girl who was trying to sort of avoid accountability and responsibility, let's say it like that, and she didn't want to be that vulnerable. And so when we kind of we spent all next February and March together with Polly, just empowering ways, trying to heal as much as possible, like trying to settle in our new routines. Started to write poetry a little bit here and there. And then when April came, it was time for her to sort of like descend into the Damian's dungeon, and Damian came and sort of like settled the rules. And that he sort of like basically said that by the rules of the curse, I have a chance to like sort of take Polly to me and kill Jessica right now. And so I kind of like wrote this series of poems during the months of April, and they became my songs of empowerment. And this is how I sort of like guided Polly out of that dungeon. But I also couldn't guide her out without the help of Bartholomew, who helped me to find the location where she was trapped. And also I couldn't help her without the Ariadne's help, because she provided me with a thread that could get me out of the labyrinth of Damian. And so with all that in mind, and with like, I was even kind of memorized some of the poems of Lana Del Rey from the book, because they were sort of very healing for Polly. And they were also became this like a cord that connects us, and that she would hear my poems and Lana Del Rey's poems, and that she will be guided to light. And so this is what we did. I guided Polly out, and we could finally start our journey together. And Damian took full control of Jessica's body at this moment, and sort of like allowing the curse to play out. And we kind of like needed to provide our consent for that. And basically the idea behind this curse was that Damian became immortal spirit in the 16th century in Stockholm, and when during his death, when he was doing this black magic ritual of ancient Egyptian pharaohs to become an immortal spirit, to gain immortality, he also in the same ritual created a curse for Polly, that he would sort of wanted to possess her in one of the future lives, wanted to possess her body, but also that he wanted to entrap Polly and make her sort of like a dark princess, let's say it like that, and that use her intuition and her powers to sort of like reign with malevolence and evil upon the lands, but also that the curse allowed him to kill Polly's embodiments over and over again, and there was nothing that could be done to stop it. And apparently the only way to stop that was to allow Damian to actually possess one of the vessels of Polly. So this was the only way to prevent Jessica's death, was to allow Damian to take control of her body, but he could only do that if Polly was living with me, because she needed to have a vessel for that time of and that was the period of 3 years. That's why the book was sort of like settled upon that time, is that once it would be published and once it would be sort of like finalized, we would remove Damian out from Jessica, and he would like sort of fulfill this karmic curse over these next 3 years, and that it would be closed off and he would be sealed, and Polly would be able to return into Jessica's body. Of course, it took us some time to be able to discover the details of this curse, and probably took us around the year to get all the information that I shared with you right now, how it was actually created and designed and all of that kind of thing. And the last ceremonies for that curse I was like keep doing until like 2024. And so the exit point from that dungeon happened to be in the forest that I was seeing in the first dream when Polly arrived, before even meeting Jessica. That first dream where I was going through the forest together with her, and I didn't know where to find this forest, but I knew that it was in Sechelt, and I kind of like asked assistants of Ariadne and Bartholomew, and they provided me with accommodations, with specific place where to rent accommodations, and I kind of like knew that this was one of the advices, spiritual advices, how to find that place. And of course, I spent first 3 days just walking around to every forest and to every place that I could sort of think about, but it was the closest forest to that residence, and that was kind of like a suggestion that I didn't fully understood right away, but that was important for me to also have my walkabout and to discover all the lands of Sechelt and discover all the different spirits and meet them. But that forest that I saw in my dream was called the Hidden Grove Forest, and this is kind of like a sort of natural park not far from Sechelt, and this is where I sort of could retrieve Polly from that dungeon. And we spent the following week in that residence, basically like talking to each other and making plans, and I could finally see her for the first time in her most raw and vulnerable form. She was the wholesome embodiment of Polly for the first time, because there was still elements trapped with Damian and trapped with Jessica before, and right now it was everything that she was in one space and time, and it was kind of intense, and it became quite clear that Polly was kind of misleading me a lot, and that only at that time I discovered her stubbornness and rebelliousness that Ariadne was talking about. We started to clash heads and started to accuse each other and just like be angry with each other, and she didn't like that arrangement of being sort of spiritual chained to me, and she couldn't sort of like, she got into this like space of self-loathing and limited self-worth because of where she was and because of like this predicament that she wanted to be with her body, but right now it was completely disconnected from Jessica, and that she was trapped inside of me, and she didn't know how it would be, and sort of like it was just too confusing and too stressful for her. But slowly we kind of settled on our plans, and that period of time, that last week of April, had the same sort of significance as the last week of January, and sort of like on the April 28th, exactly 3 months after we signed the original contract, we were supposed to present kind of details of our commitments and our obligations to the Queen, and it was kind of like the second signing of the contract, if it makes sense, like sort of where we're not just like create the formal rules of engagement, but where we actually would settle on details, because when we signed the contract we kind of like knew that we're gonna write the books, but we didn't fully understand that it's going to be 2 books that we need to write. And sort of one book became about Polly and about our story, how we sort of find each other on this path and how we sort of came to empowerment. But the second book was supposed to be the destined book of my soul, and this was the main obligation, my main contractual obligation. That's what Ariadne wanted from me. Like when we signed the contract, she specifically said, like, what's your aspirations, what you're here to do? And my soul basically said that there is like this book of knowledge that he wants to share with the world. And he kind of like presented the book, the treatment for the book in Sechelt, and then we also presented the treatment for the Polly's book, which was kind of like not what was expected from us, but this is something that we wanted to do, and we kind of like asked to be included in the contract equally. And that's when the sort of like a 3-year mark was established, that we needed to finish this first book by that time. But then it was also interesting that when I described sort of the book of Thomas to Ariadne, I was specifically saying, I kind of like because by the end of April we already did like I think 4 regressions into life of Thomas with Camilla, and couple of regressions into the life of Camilla and Eloise, trying to just determine what was happening. And sort of when I was confronted with the visions of Thomas' life, it was so much grief that I cried after each session for a week at least, because Thomas Jefferson was designed in this way that he like literally physically couldn't cry. Like there was something in his design that prevented him from crying, and that was sort of the trap for him that would sort of translate his pains to the soul, so the soul would cry them in the future, and now I was supposed to cry these tears, and they were specifically designed for this purpose, is that if I'm going to be crying them and processing them, I would be able to write the book that Thomas wanted to write. This was the entire sort of concept, but I couldn't like sort of agree to that concept because I was like, I'm just jeopardizing my entire life. I'm not going to like go into public and claim that my soul lived the life of Thomas Jefferson. I'm just going to be crucified and like persecuted for that. And I kind of like kept asking Ariadne if I can just like write the story of Thomas when I'm like, when I'm in like 60, or like when I have nothing to lose, basically, right? But Ariadne kept saying no. She's kind of like, it's not only that it's imperative for you and Polly to heal right now that life, because you would be crippled. You would not be able to become empowering shaman. You would not be able to like continue on this path, and you would not arrive to your purpose of soul healer unless you would heal the life of Thomas. And like seeing how much damage Thomas Jefferson made to my soul, it was evident that she was right. And the same was right for Polly. Polly Jefferson made so much trauma for Polly that she needed to process all of that, otherwise she wouldn't be able to be empowered. And I was also equally kind of like seeing what was going on in America, right? Like by that time. And I was like completely in shock how much darkness and how much malevolence stepped up to the surface. And I was clearly seeing that unless we would heal the past of America, America can't have a feeling present or the future. It was sort of the same as with Jessica. She would never be able to become an empowered sex worker unless we would heal her past life traumas. And the same I felt about America, seeing the darkness, seeing the malevolence, seeing the corruption of the Biden administration. It was clear that they are trying to destroy this country, and it was clear that the karma of the past keeps hunting America. And so for me, it was like the stakes were that high. Like this is how I perceived it. I was like seeing that it's not only my story, that there are so many souls would be healed through this process of writing this book. But again, I was like also very kind of like disillusioned and just detached from that. I just didn't want to do that. I knew how crazy people are. I knew that nobody wants to listen to that. I knew that I knew how Thomas Jefferson was perceived by the modern thinkers or ideologues of America. So I didn't want to have that burden on me at all, and I just wanted to sort of like make a living and like have a fulfilling life. And just I specifically asked that all I want in this life, even if I'm gonna be with Jessica or not, or with other women, or I'm gonna be alone, I just want to have my house in the forest, in the village, and just I'll be content with that. I don't need that much. I just want to have this like a hermit place of existence where I could sort of write my books and do my healing practices, and that's all I wanted. But Ariadne said that like I'm ready to include that house in the contract, and I'm ready to include anything else that you want in the contract, but you have to write this book about Thomas. And I was like toying out with different ideas how to sort of name that book, and they specifically, the Spirits of Sechelt specifically told me that I need to determine the name of the book when I'm submitting the treatment in the end of the April of 2021. And I didn't like any of my ideas, and then basically I just made this one kind of like a joking description of the book, what it is, and then basically Ariadne said, yes, this is going to be your title and I want you to stick with that title. And they basically said that the title of the book should be an account of two souls perceiving their past life as divine spiritual creators of the United States of America while living in the physical bodies of Thomas and Polly Jeffersons. This was sort of like a detailed, direct description of the book, but Ariadne said that this should be a title of this work. So we made new arrangements and new commitments in the end of April and returned kind of like renewed. It was completely different Polly at this time. She opened up to me in the ways that I couldn't like see her before, and she finally started to confess her pains to me. And interestingly, that by that time I kind of like wrote few poems. I even like some of them are I channeled, so I would wake up in like 3 a.m. and just like mumble something, almost hearing the sounds, and then in the morning I would try to translate them into English, and this is how my first poems were born into existence. And I channeled them from the same realm where Lana Del Rey gets her poems, because I was sort of like would read her poems out loud, and then I would go to sleep, and then I would start to channel, and then I would like sort of see where the story is. And sort of the first poems that I wrote, even like this I'm Counting Days and other poems, they were actually poems of Camilla written for Eloise to express her love. This is just how her love was manifesting inside of me. But Polly was kind of always she loved the poems because they kind of like were directed to her, right? Like it was poems about her, so she was like inspired as a girl, and she was kind of like, oh, this is so cool, this is so romantic, you're writing poems for me, all of that kind of thing. But then when we kind of had been in Sechelt, and she opened up and she kind of like was retrieved from that dungeon, she became this kind of like I don't know, she tried to write poems just to compete with me. And I'm kind of like, Polly, there is no competition, there is no like reason for compete. And she's kind of like, no, I can write poems equally as good as you are. And so when she wrote her first poem, I'm kind of like, no, Polly, you don't write as good as I am, because you're much better poet than I could ever be. And literally I was like so surprised by what she started to create. Like once we sort of started to untangle her, unravel her, once we sort of started to remove that spiritual baggage slowly through like doing past life regressions and through her sort of like a healing us, she was opening up with poems. She was like starting to write the most incredible and amazing poems. And I like truly, you know, like I read many different authors, but I still believe that Polly is the best English language poet that there is out there, because her poems are just so unique and so rich in details and metaphors. And I don't know, like of course I'm biased and I'm not objective, because I love this soul, and she's part of my essence and she's part of me, of course. So there is kind of like that element to it, so I can't be sort of objective, but I don't know, like this is just how I truly feel. It's like just another wonder that we experienced on this path. And once I kind of like read the first poems, and she didn't really wanted to show them to me, right? Like she was kind of like modest about it. I was like so shocked that I was like, you have to keep writing. And I keep pushing her, I keep creating space for her to write them. I keep insisting that she should polish them, that she should like invest her energies in the most empowering way. And so like we spent basically that first year, we like first year together, like 2021, we basically almost didn't write anything for our books. We just wrote poetry, and of course that poetry became foundation of our first book, of our first fairy tale. But we wrote many others that like never got into that book, and like just created a couple of the poetry collections. And yeah, I was like, once the healing started to happen, I was like just seeing how much Polly can create and how incredible she is. And so we kind of soon realized that this is the purpose why we met, is that like she wouldn't be able to write such an honest poems in Jessica's body, because she would be sort of afraid to speak out through her. And then as a sex worker, she was also kind of like, how people gonna accept me? But through me, she could write without any restrictions. I didn't have any limitations on her freedoms. I didn't like have, on the contrary, I was like, when she was being modest and shy, I was like insisting that she's lying to me, and she's lying to the readers, and that she should write what she actually feels, doesn't matter what people would think. And what we discovered is that basically she wanted to become a writer in our third life together, and then she wanted to write in the subsequent lives as well, but she never held the books of female writers in her hands, and so she thought that it's not going to be possible. And then she was also in the life of Polly Jefferson, and Polly Jefferson, all she actually wanted to do is to write the story of her life, and that she wanted to write poetry. And it just, because of the complexities of her, let's say, kind of like of her neurodivergency of Polly Jefferson, of the way that she was kind of like sort of I would say, but in today's world many would describe her as autistic, but at that time there was no such things, and nobody kind of understood why Polly was the way that she is. But because of all these things, and because of of her small body, so like physical limitations, because at that time you can only write with quill and ink, and it was just a hard physical endeavor to actually become a writer. It wasn't like just a simple task. Right now is that like women have the abilities and resources, not only time-wise, but also like the technical things, the pen and the computers. But in that time, like you have to be physically strong to be able to like produce entire manuscript. And Polly Jefferson was just this very fragile and weak and small girl, and she couldn't just physically write for the long periods of time. It was just like not possible for her. And so because all these lives, basically, she wanted to be a writer, but she never been one, because she was so scared of the society's perceptions and limitations. Right now, she elevated the stakes that it was still her karma. She still needed to write, but right now she had to write without being able to connect it to her vessel. And so, of course, for Polly, it became sort of like this kind of like perplexing emotional dilemma inside of her, because she was like, I want to be an honest writer and a poet. I want to say what I want to say and what I feel in my heart, and I want to tell my story, but I'm writing them through your body, so people would not accept me as a separate being, and then they would also criticize you for my writings, and just for claiming that you are sort of channeling another soul, and that nobody would sort of accept our story, and that they would like sort of punish you and judge you and criticize you. And I'm kind of like, well, that's kind of a liberation for you, because I don't mind sort of taking that upon myself. I don't mind people criticizing, because especially in Canada, it's just like people judging and criticizing people here for anything, for everything, and the Canadians are intentionally looking for the ways to judge somebody for something. So I'm kind of like, why does it matter? They still gonna judge. Doesn't matter what I'm gonna do. So I might as well, we can sort of pursue our most empowering path, and I want to make your writings public. And it was also kind of like became very important for me to make her promise that I'm gonna publish books under her name separately, like the name that she uses right now, and that the most empowering name that she sort of like has, Eurydice Eloise Wales, which is constructed from the names of her 3 lives, that I would publish her writings under her name specifically because I don't want to claim the art of my woman as being mine. Of course, we have the art that we wrote together. Like for example, these 2 books, we would the first one was published under my name because it was kind of like how we agreed with Polly, and the second one would be sort of written together by us. It was already written together by us, but it would not have any kind of author because it's sort of written directly from the souls. But all the other writings that we completed by now, and it's like around 10 books that we wrote during this 4-year period of time together with Polly during the duration of our contract, we have some kind of like a poetry collection that we would probably use both of our names. But there are books that she wrote from herself, like specifically her book about sex work and sexual healing arts. I think that's the most comprehensive book on the topic, that features 4 past lives of sex workers and just like our highest understanding of this art form. I think that was one of the most talented things that, again, Polly has ever written. And so all these books I want to publish under her name, and I want to make this claim that yes, I'm channeling her, and it's a female soul, but she writes through me and she can't write through her vessel, and this is how we are. And so I kind of like reassured Polly that this would be our most empowering way to proceed. And so this is the 8th episode of our podcast, and I hope to continue to tell the story in the future ones, and see you there.